1871, the Reverend Anderson Green Hughes officiated at the wedding of Samuel Carr Scott, then 21, and his fiancée Leonora Graves, aged 20. This must have been a nostalgic occasion, as the Reverend Hughes had married Sam's parents, Henderson and Margaret Scott, 22 years earlier. Margaret was able to attend the wedding, along with Sam's brothers and sisters, but tragically his father, Henderson Scott, had died the year before. Henderson was, of course, sorely missed. He had been a much-loved and respected member of his family, church, and community. Sam and his bride Nora, as she was called, settled down in Mebanesville, an early name for Mebane, North Carolina. Sam ran a prosperous general store located downtown. In addition to the store, he owned a lot of land, including a dairy farm. Sam and Nora had a little boy whom they named Walter. In addition to caring for Walter, Sam and Nora provided a home away from home for Sam's younger brothers, James Edwin and Robert, who attended the nearby Bingham School. Sam's happy home life was upended when Nora passed away after only 2 years of marriage. By 1875, Sam had married again. He and his second wife, Hetty Neal, would go on to have a large family, 6 sons and 3 daughters. Things went well for Sam and Hetty until 1897, when Sam was struck down by a massive heart attack. He was 47 years old at the time, and his youngest child, Glenn Gordon Scott, was only 3. About a week later, his oldest child, Walter, passed away in Texas at the age of 24. Both Sam and Walter were laid to rest in the cemetery of their home church, Hawfields Presbyterian. Hetty would go on to outlive Sam by 49 years. The mercantile was sold right away to provide Hetty with her widow's allowance, or dower as it was called then, but the family still had their farm. In addition to the farm, Sam left behind a considerable amount of real estate. His oldest son, Arthur Neal Scott, took over management of the farm in order to support the family. In 1900, 3 years after Sam passed away, the population of Mebane was 218, and the town covered only 1 square mile. The economy of the area was deeply rooted in agriculture and manufacturing. At that time, the largest local employer was the White Furniture Company, started in 1881 by brothers Will and Dave White. In 1904, Sam's son Arthur Neal Scott went into business with another young man named William Warren Corbett. It is thought that they started making mattresses in Box Springs in the loft of Cook's Mill, north of Mebane, but there may have been other locations. In those days, mattresses were stuffed with a variety of materials, including cotton and straw. Corbett and Scott sourced the ticking for their mattresses from the flour sacks used at the mill. By all accounts, 1906 was a big year for Arthur Neal Scott. His factory was doing well, and he met a lovely young woman named Carrie Pickett. Arthur Neal and Carrie got engaged, and on June 28, 1906, they married at the bride's home in nearby Efland. Arthur Neal's brother Quincy served as his best man. After a honeymoon trip to the mountains, the newlyweds settled down in Mebane. A year later, they would welcome a little daughter, whom they named Ruby Pickett Scott. Their happiness was to be short-lived, however. Carrie passed away when Ruby was only a year old. Also in 1906, Scott and Corbett decided to move their factory to a larger location in downtown Mebane along the railroad. Another businessman, Benjamin F. Warren, joined around this time in the leadership of the company. We are told that some of the wood used to build the new factory came from the land surrounding Arthur Neal's home. It would not be long before the noonday whistle from the White Furniture Company was joined by a blast from the diesel horn at the Mebane Bedding Company. The early success of Mebane Bedding caught the eye of journalist Al Fairweather. Mr. Fairweather wrote for a magazine called Everything, which was based in Greensboro. The December 1906 issue of Everything included the following remarks about the new company. Passing through Mebane on the train, we have seen from time to time a sign on one building, the Mebane Bedding Company, and then when we would go through the town again, we would see another building and another sign, and we are told that if we go through there again within the next 3 months, We will see still another building bearing the same sign. In 1912, the Mebane Bedding Company won a blue ribbon at the State Fair. This honor brought the company well-deserved recognition and consequently much new business. The company grew steadily and over time developed a reputation for attention to detail, customer service, and innovation. In the early 1920s, the Mebane Bedding Company expanded by purchasing the Silkhart Mattress Company in Sanford, Florida. More growth occurred in 1928 when they merged with the Royal and Borden Manufacturing Company of Goldsboro and the Cotton Belt Manufacturing Company of Rocky Mount. After this point, the company would be known as the Mebane Royal Company. The water tower displaying their new name could be seen from quite a distance. It was in use until Mebane installed a city-wide water supply. The Mebane Royal Company bought out the royal interests in the 1940s and at this point changed its name to the Mebane Company. Over the next few years, the company expanded by buying yet more factories. In 1976, the Mebane Company became known as Kingsdown, the name it carries to this day. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Having been a widower for 6 years, Arthur Neal met Maud Mebane, a music teacher who attended his church. They married in 1914. Although Maud's parents lived in Virginia, where the wedding took place, her people were originally from Mebane, which was named for one of her ancestors. The marriage of Neal Scott and Maud Mebane brought together two of the pioneer families of what is now Alamance County. Over the next few years, Arthur, Neal, and Maud had 3 children: Myrtle Mebane Scott, who died in infancy, Arthur Neal Scott Jr., and Maud Elizabeth Scott, affectionately known as Lib. Maud and Arthur Neal Sr. were married for 29 years until Maud passed away in 1943. Despite his busy schedule, Arthur Neal Sr. always made time for his family. His granddaughter, Mary Neal Scott Ackus, and her cousin, Bill Pearson, both enjoyed visiting with their family in Mebane. They remembered their grandfather as the sort of person who took care of people. He spent time with them when they visited, and even arranged for them to try milking a cow. Mary Neal especially recalls the fun of getting ice cream with her grandfather. Bill recalls taking walks around the lake located north of their grandfather's farm. Founding such a large and successful company as Kingsdown, it might be easy to overlook some of Arthur Neal Scott Sr.'s other important contributions to Mebane. It was expected that the heads of local businesses would be involved in their church and in civic organizations, and Arthur Neal Scott Sr. was no exception. He was known as a person who helped others and was concerned about his community. He was active in the Shriners and the Civic Club, and for a time was on the board of Craftique, a local company that made fine mahogany furniture. As we can see from the book Change for a Dollar, Arthur Neal Scott Sr. was involved in yet another important venture, one that would be of great value to the citizens of Mebane. In 1909, Arthur Neal was elected to the very first board of directors of what is now known as Mebane First Savings and Loan. At its inception, the new company was called the Mebane Home Builders Association. The company was founded to provide mortgages for those seeking to own their own homes. You might be wondering why such a small place like Mebane would need a savings and loan. In the early 1900s, banks were not the reliable institutions they are today. There was no deposit insurance, and a bank failure could be catastrophic. In addition, banks were often not interested in issuing mortgages for those who wished to buy their own home. The population of Mebane was growing rapidly due to employment opportunities at the White Furniture Company and at Mebane Bedding. Local families were interested in owning their own homes rather than renting. In 1909, a group of local businessmen decided to address this problem. The Home Builders Association used a simple model. They sold shares, which were essentially certificates of deposit, and then used the revenue to fund mortgages. Home builders did not even have an office for many years. The officers met around a table at the Reliable Furniture Company or at the White Furniture Company, or even in each other's homes. Their assets grew slowly, and the Home Builders Association would not have its own building until 1952. Arthur Neal served on the board until 1933, when other duties became too pressing for him to continue. You will be happy to learn that Mebane's First Savings and Loan is alive and well to this day, serving the community from their location on West Center Street. Arthur Neal Sr. was vice president and manager of the Mebane Royal Company until he retired in 1946, the year his mother passed away. Over the years, several of his family members worked for the company. His brother, Samuel Carr Scott Jr., was a salesman in Mebane, and his son, Arthur Neal Jr., managed the plant in Rocky Mount. Arthur Neal Sr. died in 1948 at the age of 71. His home was sold and for a time served as the headquarters for the local office of the American Legion. Some of his land became a housing development known as Forest Lake, and another portion is now the home of E.M. Yoder Elementary School. After Arthur Neal's death, the family maintained a continued presence at the company. Arthur Neal's son-in-law, Albert Conrad Pearson, served on the board until 1994. After that, his son Bill Pearson, Arthur Neal Scott Sr.'s grandson, served until 2018, when the company was sold. It is tempting to think back to 1848, when Henderson and Margaret Scott married and settled on land south of what would become Mebane, North Carolina. Would they have anticipated that their son Sam would be a successful merchant and that their grandson, Arthur Neal Scott, would play such a significant part in Mebane's development? Of course, they would have been proud of their family and their accomplishments, but perhaps not so very surprised at the way they showed initiative and persistence in life and in business. After all, Henderson, who was a successful farmer and entrepreneur, always said that adding some business to farming was a good way for a man to get along.